Hey, howdy, hey, everybody. Fax 5 is back, here with part 2 of my mini-series on womanhood in Nazi Germany. This speech will be one from Gertrude Schulz-Klink, who, from her Wikipedia page, it says she was a Nazi Party member and leader of the National Socialist Women's League. She was born in 1902, died in 1999. Oh, she lived to be 97. She was a rather, I want to say, unrepentant individual. In fact, where is it? On a wiki page it says, in her book Die Frau im Dritten Reich, or The Woman in the Third Reich, in 1978, Schulz-Klink demonstrated her continuing support for Nazi ideology. She once again upheld her position on Nazism in an interview with Historia Claudia Kunz in the early 1980s. So, yeah, that's the kind of lady we're dealing with. The thing that I am reading, it's not exactly a transcript of a speech, but rather well, let me see what it was again, double check. It's it's the account of the women, it's the official account, from the Nazi archives of the time, so it does kind of mix, things they actually said with a bit of a narrative description. But without further ado, let's get into this bad boy. Background. This is the account of the women's rally at the 1936 Nuremberg rally, taken from the official party proceedings. The speakers were Gertrude Schulz-Klink, the head of the Nazi Women's League, and Hitler himself, who outlines the Nazi view of the role of women. The Rally of the German Women's League. The National Socialist Women's League met on Friday morning in the Congress Hall. The enormous hall was filled 2 hours before the meeting began. Many thousands of women were unable to enter and gathered outside to hear the proceedings over loudspeakers. The Gau and district leaders, the leaders of the Women's Labor Service, and those of the League of German Girls took their places on the platform, and the officials of the National Socialist Women's League and the German Women's Work filled the seats. To the side, one could see numerous representatives of German women's groups from abroad in colorful and elaborate costumes. The farmers among the participants also wore their beautiful traditional costumes. Just before the meeting began, 600 leaders of the Women's Labor Service and a delegation of the BDM, or League of German Girls, entered and took their positions on the steps of the podium. The meeting then greeted with shouts of Heil the Reich Women's leader, Frau Schulz-Klink, and her aide, Hilgenfeldt. After a piece by the Reich Symphony Orchestra, Hilgenfeldt opened the meeting and greeted the participants and foreign guests in the name of the National Women's Leader. The 20,000 women rose to sing Our Fate Was to Be a Free People. As the song faded, Reich Women's leader Schulz-Klink spoke. It is characteristic of both people and nations that at times things happen that overthrow former ideas and values and replace them with new ones. History calls such events revolutions. They have occurred over in the millennia, and relatively few of them prove of lasting benefit. A revolution, whether in an individual or a nation, deserves the name only when it allows the true, appropriate, and deepest strengths of a people to come to expression once again. Our German people has had 2 revolutions in our recent past. 1918, with all its blood and barricades, noise, and brutality, met the outward requirements of a revolution. In reality, however, it represented only the culmination of a decades-long process during which the German people were driven away from their true nature. We know today that this so-called revolution was necessary in order to bring the real revolutionaries to the attention of our people, to arouse them against the false ways our people had followed, against the false thinking that had taken over all important areas of our public life. The 9th of November 1918 was not led by people who were guided by the idea that Germans should once again find themselves and return to their true nature. Rather, it was the work of people who declared the idea of the so-called people or the so-called German people outdated and replaced a passionate affirmation of ourselves with the thesis of a universal so-called humanity. Facts 5, I'm here just to make a comment. Well, first, some background for anyone who may not be quite as familiar with what she's referring to. According to its Wikipedia page, the German Revolution of 1918 through 1919 was, well, technically one of many kind of mini revolutions going on in Germany around the end of the First World War, but the gist of this one was that it ended with the establishment of the Weimar Republic. Another thing I want to comment on is just her tendency to, what's the word? Like, you can see she really appeals to, no wait, that's not it. Oh, the naturalistic fallacy, talking about how it's just natural for the German people to organize in such a way as is described in Nazi Germany. I also want, the listeners to really take note of how important the idea of, specific races clearly is to the Nazis. I mean, yeah, okay, everybody kind of knows it, but I feel like it's a bit different to just kind of hear about it than actually hear it from the horse's mouth itself. And, hearing Schultz Klink, go into great detail to describe how, Germany, or rather the German race is not a part of a so-called humanity, but its own specific thing that must be protected. And she's very insistent on that in those couple paragraphs alone. Well, it should really hammer home the theme that we're going for. Well, one of them anyway. However, peoples, by which we mean the generations of ancient families and tribes, have always been a part in the most varied past events. We are therefore justified in thinking there is a larger meaning to them, that a unified people will always be necessary under the laws established by a higher power. The empty talk about universal humanity is a dishonest and senseless attempt to replace eternally valid laws with the limited strength of mere human thinking. I actually found that last part to be kind of funny, at least after I initially read this thing, because although she does, vaguely mention, I think it was like God's normal order or natural order or something like that once or so later in the speech, she doesn't actually explain much of what this higher power is, and saying that any other, society is just human, but the society, that Hitler and the Nazis are creating is at least divinely inspired. Perhaps an implication of this is she's saying that Hitler is a divine figure, but I will admit that's me being a bit silly. Although at the same time, I honestly wouldn't be surprised if she thought that. Thus, the 9th of November 1918 stirred those people in Germany for whom the concept of people still had a meaning. They formed the core of the National Socialist movement. The 9th of November 1918 represented the dreadful revelation of a kind of universal thinking. The 30th of January 1933 represented the triumphant affirmation of people bound to their race under eternally valid laws of life. This revolution lacked the usual characteristics, no bloodshed or uproar, but it brought the German nation back to its true self. For anyone unsure, the 30th of January 1933 was when Hitler was sworn in as Chancellor by President Paul von Hindenburg. I will say that I always did find it kind of funny when, the Nazis, they talk about how, our revolution didn't have any bloodshed. And I'm thinking, there was Kristallnacht and Night of the Long Knives and other types of, Nazi aggressiveness, goonery, that sort of thing. Although, I guess if you want to get technical, and I do like getting kind of silly with definitions, there was no bloodshed regarding Hitler just literally being sworn in as Chancellor. After all, he did not become the total Führer until a little later. And again, I really wouldn't call it a revolution. I mean, you're just being sworn in as what is, for my American listeners, may as well be the Speaker of the House, or, well, actually, wait, the the Weimar Republic was unicameral, so I guess it'd be if you combine Speaker of the House and Senate Majority Leader into one position. Although, I mean, I guess you could say it was a metaphorical revolution, but even then, it's a bit awkward just to poise a metaphorical revolution in contrast to a literal, bloody revolution, insofar as there was a lot of bloodshed going on at the end of World War I in Germany. It's, when it comes to these Nazi speeches, you're not supposed to think about them, but, well, I torment myself anyway. It recalled much eternal that had for a time been forgotten. What was new was the will to bring the knowledge of our nature not only to the individual, but to persuade him of the following. It is not enough to hold foreign thinking impossible for us. Rather, the knowledge of the inadequacy of foreign thinking must lead to a passionate affirmation of your own nature. This is the thinking we are bringing to the German people, and that is the work of the women of this people. That is the worldview that guides our actions. In contrast to abstract and inorganic Bolshevist theories of humanity, we are the bearers of an organic moral life order. I can understand what she means by inorganic. She's saying it's not natural, but I'm really not sure what she means by abstract. Is the idea that it's too difficult to really comprehend? Actually, wait, now that I think about it, I think she's trying to say that, these Bolshevik, communist, Jewish ideas of the family, they're, not only are they fake, they're just too bizarre to even comprehend. Our method, it's simple, it's tried and true, you don't even have to think about it, it's just common sense, I think that's what she's saying. Let me give several practical examples from the Soviet Union that prove that lovely theories are not able to deal with the reality of life, but rather that life's powerful hand takes revenge on disobedient and arbitrary human behavior. Facts 5, I'm here. I want to say that I don't really know how accurate her statements regarding the Soviet Union were, but at the same time, I don't really think the accuracy of the statements matter for the sake of this commentary, because it's less about whether or not she's factually correct and more what her critiques are and how they demonstrate not only her view but the overall Nazi view regarding what womanhood should have been like. If any of you in the comments are aware of an error she makes, whether unintentionally or maliciously, feel free to comment and I'll take a look at them. The Soviet Union declared the legal equality of men and women in all areas in law on 18th of November 1918. That meant the same right to work, the same duty to support oneself, the right to control over one's own body, which for the woman meant the right to abortion. For obvious reasons, since I'm an American and abortion is just one of those things that, discussions of it never seem to go away, I might as well give my own 2 cents regarding this. What I find particularly interesting, maybe not surprising, is, the way the Nazis viewed abortion. They viewed it more as just kind of a method of control, for lack of a better word. And it's rather interesting that, she's not talking about, the idea of an abortion, killing an unborn baby, but rather the idea that a woman being able to abort a baby demonstrates a type of control over her own body that a woman should not have, according to Mrs. Schultz-Klink. It is, my inner smug lib would probably be something like, oh, you see, even the Nazis saw abortion, as a way, or as a woman's right to choose and control over her own body, but maybe just a coincidence, but, what am I saying? It's not a coincidence. The Nazis hated people having control over themselves that didn't conform properly. The view was that men and women had full freedom only when the state stayed as far as possible from personal relationships. Okay, this one was actually kind of funny. It's like, I've heard people critique the Soviet Union in a lot of ways, but I've never actually seen someone critique the Soviet Union critique it from the right for not being as involved in people's personal lives as it should have been. Like, I've run into, well, I'll be honest, I don't know if they're trolls or not. I always take, weirdos on the internet with a grain of salt. Like, those folks saying, like, oh, Gorbachev was too weak and the Soviet Union collapsed. But I've never heard someone, from the right saying, like, oh, the Soviet Union, it needs to get more involved in people's day-to-day lives. Oh, God. The state provided no legal rights in marriage, which meant that there were only two forms of marriage. One could register a marriage before a government office, or one could be married without virtue of state ceremony. This part did confuse me a bit, like, I know at least in America that, in some places, I don't know the exact rules state by state, but, it is hypothetically possible for, a couple to just go to a courthouse or something, sign a document, and bam, you're married like that. And, Vegas is kind of famous or infamous for that. But I'm a bit confused, like, without virtue of state ceremony. So it's like, what, do you just, I don't know, like you just mail in the application or something? Like, I really don't get how that works. Like, even, at least the way I'm imagining it, like, even if, I don't know, me and some random gal or guy went to, just the local county clerk, we got married, the judge banged the gavel, like, you're married. I mean, that strikes me as a state ceremony. It might not have much pomp and circumstance, not much flair to it, but still a ceremony. Wouldn't it? Well, at least that's how it makes sense to me. If anyone in the comments can help, please explain. I could use that help. The result was that even when one had been married officially, the individual partners had the right, when they were unhappy, to go to the same office and, for a very small fee, dissolve the marriage. Should there be children, they would be housed in collective homes, since both father and mother worked and housing was in short supply, given the migration from the countryside to the cities. The absence of resources in such homes led of necessity to demanding money from the economically stronger partner. The result was constant legal battles and enormous misery for the children. Simultaneously, women were increasingly absorbed in industry and the military. In 1918, 24 out of 1,000 miners were women. By 1932, 153 out of 1,000 were women, a number that had grown to 321 by 1935. In automobile and tractor manufacturing, women are 30.4% of the workforce, and 63.5% of the drilling industry. The full equality of the sexes had the further result that girls are given the same military training as boys in the Communist Youth Organization and schools. The Red Army is the only army in the world in which both men and women are trained as soldiers and officers to wage aggressive war. This is more something I find kind of amusing in hindsight. The fact that Mrs. Schultz-Klink is, speaking with pride about how, well, I should say it's implied rather, that, the Nazi army isn't like this, we don't train women for aggressive war. And then, many years, I don't know, decade or so, a little less later, the Nazi army was quite literally running out of able-bodied men who could fight. They had to resort to, basically young teens and elderly and that sort of thing. Ironic, isn't it? Well, I don't know if ironic's the right word. Maybe it is. At the opening of the International Communist Women's Congress in Moscow on the 8th of March 1936, Frau Kogan called on communist women throughout the world to fight the enemies of the Soviet Union. Among other things, she said the following: the effect of Bolshevist so-called freedom was helpless women and wretched children, worn-out sick women as the result of heavy labor and abortions, a rapid fall in the birth rate, and growing complaints from the women themselves that finally led the Soviet government to make proposals on the 25th of May 1936 for improvements in these areas. A law was proclaimed 4 weeks later that required both partners getting a divorce to appear in person, and that a note be made in the personal papers of the partner who wanted the divorce. The fee for the first divorce was 50 rubles, for the second 150, and for the third and following ones 300 rubles. Abortion was permitted only in those cases where continuation of the pregnancy represented danger to the life or health of the woman, or in cases of inherited diseases. Abortions could be performed only in hospitals or clinics. Forcing a woman to have an abortion received a sentence of up to 2 years in prison. Pregnant women who violated the law would receive a public reprimand for the first offense of the law and a fine of 300 rubles for subsequent offenses. The law further provides an increase in financial assistance for new mothers and state grants to those with numerous children. Let's assume she's being completely correct about all of these. One thing that I know she's not quite including is the effects of the infamous Holodomor famine from mostly 32 to 33, as well as the fact that they let me try to double check exactly. Okay, yeah, so the Soviet Union did censuses every 10 or so years. So in 1926 they had a census, and then 1937 they were planning to have the next one. I'll admit I'm kind of hypothesizing, but I get the vibe that one thing the Soviet government was aware of was the fact that they had lost a lot of people due to a mix of their repression, a mix of their god-awful policies, bit of genocide in there, and they realized, like, oh crud, we need people to actually to function. In fact, I forget exactly what he did, but I know Stalin did fiddle around with the census questionnaires and census numbers. But I do have the feeling that these changes were not necessarily to appease the natural order of women or something like that, but rather to try to boost the numbers of population after losing so many. Granted, I will say, to be fair, the Soviet Union was very, very clamped shut on Holodomor for a very long time, so I doubt that Gertrude Schultz-Klink would have really known that, although I'm sure if she did, she wouldn't have cared. This law, the Reichswomen leader continued, is the beginning of life's powerful answer to the theories of freedom, of the individual, and of so-called humanity. We Germans had 14 years under an attempt to impose Bolshevist principles on us. Okay, rereading it, I didn't really notice, or I didn't really think about the use of the word Bolshevist principles that time because, any history buffs listening, or at least folks who are oddly familiar with the kind of Weimar and pre-Weimar era, or Weimar, they would know that, the Spartacus Rebellion was aggressively put down. You can say a lot of things, both good and bad, okay, well, a lot bad, and some good, I guess, about the Weimar Republic era, but to act like it was communist or Bolshevist that's just ahistorical nonsense. But the way that Schultz-Klink doesn't really care about that, it shows that, to her, basically anything that's not amenable to her or the Nazi Party's views is just Bolshevist by default. The German woman took her place alongside the German man when she realized that a struggle was going on between God's order for earthly affairs and universal apostles of humanity who wanted to replace these eternal laws. It was a battle between good and evil. I'll be honest, like I gotta love just how dramatic she is. It's just kind of funny. It's like, people, having unusual families or things that aren't exactly conformist. This is a battle between good and evil. She's like the kind of person who will, she'd watch a soccer game between Germany and France and be like, this is a fate for the soul of the nation and the people who live within it. And, Germany lost. Or, whoa, goal, yeah. It's just just back up a little, just take a breath. Do whatever the internet equivalent of touching grass is... Good and evil are equally strong forces in life. They find visible form in National Socialism and Bolshevism. National Socialism is good to become visible for we Germans. It respects the earth from which our people have grown. Oh, God. Bolshevism is absolute evil because it is a universal approach that rejects the eternal laws of nature. Of all the critiques one could make of the Soviet Union, well, okay, let's be fair, this was like 1936. It's very doubtful that, Gertrude Schultz-Klink would have known the full devastation of the Soviets' policies at the time, but even for that time frame, that's the best you could come up with? I mean, I know she said it a bunch of times, but come on, I mean, I guess when you are already a totalitarian state, you don't have very many legs you can stand on regarding the criticism of another totalitarian state, but come on, you couldn't come up with something better? The Reich Women's leader concluded that our courage to do good must always be greater than our fear of evil. We must never make weak compromises. Our work is to spread this idea. It is nothing other than a daily struggle between those two forces. It is not ultimately a battle of means or money, that is, of perishable things, but rather it is ennobled by the spirit in whose service we stand. In the battle between good and evil, we are the obedient servants of the good. At the International Women's Congress in Moscow on the 8th of March 1936, Frau Kogan called for the women of the world to fight for the victory of Bolshevism. At our Congress, we National Socialist women call on all women loyal to their people throughout the world as the physical and spiritual mothers of their people, to join in an unwritten but strong community as servants of the good in the battle against evil in the world. Then we, with our daddy, along with the women of other nations and their daddies, will guarantee the peace of the world. Gertrude Schultz-Klink's speech ends here. There's another part which is, Hitler before the German women. I'll get to that part soon, but first I just want to comment on the end of the speech from Gertrude Schultz-Klink. So let's really break it down, because one thing that I find interesting, and I'll admit I didn't even notice it the first time I read through this, was there's very little about the positives of the National Socialist way of life for women. I mean, it's implied, but most of the, for lack of a better word, concrete stuff is focused on the negatives, or real or perceived, coming from the Soviet Union and the so-called Bolshevist way of life. Now, again, let me remind you, this is regarding not just any regular old domestic policy, but rather a sense of conformity, saying that, women and men, they have to absolutely live a certain way, can only be this one way, must conform, all that jazz. And I find it interesting that just any sort of alternative lifestyle, any sort of, I guess even just unusual or unorthodox way of just living with a husband and wife or that sort of thing, that's not just something that personally offends her or even something that she just doesn't get, but it's something that she clearly sees as, evil incarnate, something that is a threat to all of society as we know it, or as she knows it. And it's come on, I don't know, if you have, a stay-at-home dad and a mom who works, that's not gonna lead to the end of civilization. That shit's not, the epitome of evil. It's just, you hear this similar type of all or nothing rhetoric today. I really don't like the all or nothing stuff. I mean, okay, I get it, some things are all or nothing. But I guess just coming from an American perspective, there's always been this, emphasis on, you do you, live your own weird life as long as you're not hurting anyone else, that sort of thing. And I mean, if you find happiness and if you find, the so-called traditional way of, a submissive stay-at-home mother and, the outgoing breadwinner father, honestly, good for you. Like, be happy. Like, live a life of contentment and fulfillment. If that means, conforming to traditional views, that's great. It works for you. And if that means, doing your own thing, that's also great. That works for you too. So long as you're not hurting anyone and it's all consensual and all that jazz, live a good life. And people who live weird or unusual or alternative or unorthodox lifestyles, well, it's not the end of the world, and it's not the embodiment of evil Bolshevist communism, regardless of what Gertrude Schultz-Klink tells you. Well, she's dead, but... Okay, so if Gertrude Schultz-Klink's ghost comes back and tries to tell you this, it's not true. I guess, maybe she could be reincarnated or possessing someone, or... I don't really know what the whole afterlife thing is. I'm just trying to roll with it. But, well, now let's get to Hortler's speech. Daddy before the German women. Daddy began by speaking of the educational mission of National Socialism, the results of which were increasingly visible. Daddy again found words that went to the heart about the duties and lives of German women. Here is part of what Daddy said. Our entire people today is filled with optimism. What a splendid youth we have once more in Germany. Everything has become so cheerful, so confident. Believe me, that is the most important thing a person needs. Okay, like just Trump has ruined the whole believe me expression just for me forever. Like, whenever I see it written, I always read it in his accent. It's just like, oh God. A person who is not joyful cannot sense joy. Hang on. A person who is not joyful cannot sense joy. A person who is not joyful cannot sense joy. A person, so an individual, who is not joyful, so who is not happy, or, let me double check if there's like let's see, definitions of joyful. Okay, from Merriam-Webster, joyful, experiencing, causing, or showing joy. Happy. Okay, so a person who is not experiencing, causing, or showing joy cannot sense joy. A person who is not happy cannot sense happiness? What? Is this a translation thing? Like, does it make more sense in German? Am I missing something right in front of my face? Like a person who is not joyful cannot sense joy. Ay, freaking vey. One needs optimism in order to live. It begins with children. It takes optimism to bring a child into the world. What can it become? What shall it become? Every mother believes her child is the best. This is a healthy optimism. When a child is born, the mother receives it with joy. She worships this small creature. Again, maybe it's a translation thing. Like, I don't know, maybe small creatures just more accepted as a term in German, but I've never seen anyone refer to a baby as a small creature or something similar and mean it positively. Like, maybe if someone doesn't have a baby, they might call it, a little monster or something like that, or a little thing or something like that, but oh, I should say there's in parentheses it says stormy applause, so I don't know. Wait, okay. When a child is born, the mother receives it with joy. She worships this small creature. Yeah, small creature. Alright, back to this bad boy. The child itself begins life with enormous optimism. I personally subscribe to the school of thought that a child is born with no state of mind, blind to the ways of mankind. It's like a jungle out there. Makes me wonder how I keep from going under. It wants to live, and it charges into life with the great optimism of such a little creature. The optimism that accompanies us through life even survives death. When the end of life comes, human optimism falls back on the Almighty. He overcomes the terrifying knowledge of the end of life with a triumphant optimism in eternal life. Woe to the people or to the nation that loses this capacity. You know, when I first read the part about the optimism that accompanies us through life, even survives death, I was a bit confused about that, but then he actually did explain it a bit when he said that, it involves being, what's the word? Being triumphant optimism in eternal life. And he says, woe to the people or to the nation that loses this capacity. Maybe this is a specific jab at the Soviet Union that was, notably atheist in its approach. At the same time, I think that, this demonstrates the way Hitler viewed religion. Folks say, oh, he was religious or he was atheist, and I personally come to the conclusion that Hitler viewed religion as nothing more than a tool he could use to manipulate others and maintain power. And honestly, I think that's just the gist of his philosophy, If he can use it to manipulate others and maintain power, then so be it. Well, I guess there's a bit more to it than that, but when it comes to these various annoying questions, a lot of it seems to boil down to that sort of thing. Each year we see that the inner confidence of the German people has grown yet more, as has his confidence in his own worth, in his position in the world, and in his confidence in himself and in our community. Winning the faith and confidence of the people is the prerequisite for the success of any political leader. Must I not be the greatest optimist of all? Daddy said to long-lasting and enthusiastic shouts of Heil. Those abroad may say, that's fine for the men, but your women cannot be optimistic. They are oppressed and dominated and enslaved. You give them no freedom of equality. We answer, what you see as a yoke, others see as a blessing. What is heaven to one is hell for another. It is kind of funny to see Hitler, of all people, make the argument of well, that's just your opinion, man. I mean, we all know what Hitler and the party thought of opinions that didn't quite match up. Although, jokes aside, I do know they tended to be very, absolutist in their views of things. You might recall the whole, it's good versus evil. This is what Klink said earlier, but now Hitler is saying, oh yeah, that's your opinion, that's what we tell those guys. Huh? Wait, these speakers were back to back. Daddy sarcastically proved the illogic of such criticism. As long as we have sound men, and we National Socialists will see to that, there will be no women throwing hand grenades in Germany, no women sharpshooters. That is not equality for women, but rather their debasement. That didn't prove anything. I mean, that was a statement of opinion, okay, but that didn't prove anything. It just asserted that, women in the military is not at the call of the Communist Internationale and of Comrade Stalin, we are ready to join the front ranks against the enemies of the socialist fatherland and to fight to the last drop of blood for communism throughout the world. For us, the woman has always been the loyal companion of the man in work and life. People often tell me, you want to drive women out of the professions. No, I only want to make it possible for her to found her own family and to have children, for that is how she can best serve our people. If a woman jurist does the best possible work, but next to her lives a woman who has given birth to 5, 6, or 7 healthy children who are well educated, I would say the following. From the standpoint of the eternal values of our people, the woman who has borne and raised children has done more, given more, accomplished more for the future of our people. Okay, so wait, he says he does not want to drive women out of the professions, but he wants to... But wait, okay, so... it's just a bit confusing. So it seems that... how do I word this? He says he does not want to drive women out of the professions, but he wants women to be homemakers. So I guess it's like, I'm not going to force women out of work, but I'm going to, incentivize them to become homemakers because that's the best thing they can do. I think that's what he's saying. I guess what he's saying, actually now that I think about it, it seems to be he's saying like, oh, they'll say I want to drive women out of professions, and he's taking that to mean I'm going to pass an edict which bans women from working, and he's saying, no, I'm not going to do that. I'd rather just incentivize them to, not work. Not work outside the home. I mean, if women want to work outside the home, that's up to them. If they don't, cool beans too. Real leadership has the duty to enable every man and woman to fulfill their dreams, or at least make it easier for them to do so. We seek this goal through laws that encourage the healthy education of children. But we have done more than simply pass laws. We are educating for German women and girls, a manly youth, the men of tomorrow. This kind of reminds me of, I think it was what Henry Ford said about the Model T, and he said, it comes in whatever color you want, so long as that color is black, or something like that. And it's basically like, oh yeah, we're going to help women fulfill their dreams, as long as those dreams are being a homemaker. Although, one thing I really can't get over is the weird type of contradiction Hitler has regarding the roles of the individual versus the community. He'll repeatedly comment on the importance of the community, but also the importance that the individual work hard for their dreams. Now, based on my, I'll admit, amateurish research, his general idea was that an individual should work as hard as possible to serve their community, and the hard work that they put into serving their community should be individually recognized, rewarded, etc. But that still took a lot of parsing out to even try to figure out. I believe we have found the right way to educate a healthy youth. Let me say this to all the literary know-it-alls and philosophers of equality. Laughter. Do not deceive yourselves. There are two separate areas in the life of a nation, that of men and that of women. Nature has rightly ordained that men head the family and are burdened with the task of protecting their people, the community. The world of the woman, when she is fortunate, is her family, her husband, her children, her home. From there she can see the whole. The two arenas together join to form a community that enables a people to survive. We want to build a common world of both sexes in which each sees its own tasks, tasks that it alone can do and therefore must do alone. First, I have to say, I'm actually kind of surprised of just how straightforward that was this time. When it comes to reading these Nazi speeches, sometimes it can be flowery and tricky to decipher. Other times, it's surprisingly straightforward. This was a straightforward moment. This has been a certified straightforward moment. And of course, there's also, the whole appeal to nature, this idea that our system is just natural, don't bother fighting it. It is kind of interesting that, there's laughter in parentheses when it says, let me say this to all the literary know-it-alls and philosophers of equality, do not deceive yourselves. It is interesting, every now and again, at least I've run into, Hitler making, anti-intellectual remarks. You may even recall in that other Hitler speech I read through when, he asked, do we want some bookworm making up a reason for the contrary? I do wonder in particular, let me say to all the literary know-it-alls and philosophers of equality, and then there's laughter right there. And I'm thinking, was that a running joke or something that folks in the audience would have found funny at the time? Maybe it's funnier in German. I don't know. In my 18 years of struggle, I have gone a way that knowledge and consciousness of duty demanded. I have never left this way, but my life will have meaning only if our people lives, if a healthy posterity matures. As I travel through Germany, I see in the millions of children nothing less than what gives meaning to all our work. I see children who, in obeying their mothers, also obey me. It says stormy applause right here, but I guess just from an American perspective, it is, like, I always did just find it kind of funny, you know, just how big-headed he was, talking about how, oh yes, you know, like they might be obeying their mothers, but really they're obeying me, you know, me, the Fuhrer, the daddy, the big man on campus, that sort of thing. Like, it's always got to be about himself. When I see this wonderful growing youth, my work becomes easy. I overcome every weakness. Then I know why I do everything. It is not to build some miserable business that will perish, but rather this work is for something lasting and eternal. A vital part of this future is the German girl, the German woman, and thus we meet the girl, the woman, the mother. Hang on, I gotta, okay, wait. Okay. A vital part of this future is the German girl, comma, the German woman, comma, the German woman, comma, and thus we meet the girl, comma, the woman, comma, the mother. The German girl, the German woman, and thus we meet the girl, the German girl, the German woman, and thus we meet the girl, the woman, the mother. Is he ad-libbing at this point? Like, a vital part of this future is the German girl, the German woman, and thus we meet the girl, the woman, the mother. If anyone has any idea what he means, like, or even just why this particular choice of words, let me know in the comments or some other way. Send me a smoke signal, I guess, or get a plane to fly a message in the sky or something. Maybe I'll see it. I do not measure the success of our work by our roads. I do not measure it by our new factories or new bridges or new divisions. Rather, I measure our success by the effect we have on the German child, the German youth. If they succeed, I know our people will not perish and our work will not have been in vain. I am convinced that no one understands our work better than the German woman. Long-lasting, jubilant applause. Our opponents think that Germany has tyrannized women. I can only reply that without the support and true devotion of the women of the party, I could never have led the movement to victory. Renewed enthusiastic applause. And I know that also in hard times when the know-it-alls and those who think themselves wise lose confidence, women's hearts will remain true to the movement and be bound forever to me. Okay, so like his speech does end here. There's a little part at the end, a little description. But like, I just have to comment on it. He's always it's just hilarious to see how he makes it always about himself. He's like, oh, the know-it-alls and, you know, the intellectuals, they'll lose confidence, but don't worry. I know that the women will always be bound to me. Oh, God. Freaking they. The Reich women's leader thanked Daddy after the jubilation at the end of his speech had calmed down. In the name of all German women, she promised to work hard to ease his concerns. Not only the Reich women's leader's words, but also the jubilation of the crowd followed Daddy as he left the hall. While singing continued in the hall, and the women's leader led a final Sieg Heil as an oath of affirmation to Daddy, the tens of thousands of women waiting outside the hall greeted and thanked Daddy. Well, this was the second part in my Nazi Germany views on women miniseries. I don't know why, but I had an oddly fun time reading this one. Like, I don't normally improvise, yet I just found myself improvising my comments throughout this particular speech. Well, technically 2 speeches. Well, I guess it'd be more like a pamphlet or a handout with 2 speeches and some commentary on it. But still, like, I guess maybe it's the way it was translated, and also just the implied hilarity of some of these. Now, I should say that these are the words that were written. I can't speak for what was actually said. In fact, like, even the guy who runs this site, what was his name again? Let me double check real fast. Randall Bytework? Yeah, Randall Bytework. You know, like for Joseph Goebbels' infamous, iconic, Total War speech. He's like, Wollt ihr den totalen Krieg? He actually has two versions, one on the website being the printed version, and one in his book. Pretty good book, called Landmark Speeches of National Socialism. It's a decent book. I'd recommend. I have an ebook copy. I recommend getting it if you want to see some more neat speeches. But yeah, like he has the spoken version versus the written version, because the spoken version has some various, I guess, ad-libs and impromptu statements that were not reflected in the written version. Let's see. Well, I guess only time will tell what part 3 has. Thank you for making it this far. You can find the whole speech and lots of other translations of Nazi and East German propaganda at the Randall Byteworks website. There's a link in the description. Also, feel free to, like this, share it around, subscribe to the channel if you want. Give me that dopamine rush that only strangers, on the internet are capable of giving me. If you want to actually donate money to me, I set up a Ko-Fi account thing. Chances are, if you actually are donating money to me, you're probably the person who doesn't deserve that money in the first place. Please spend it on something better. Or don't. I'm not your boss. I'm just Vax5'em. And right now, I'm signing off.